Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. Just before we get started, I wanted to give a content warning just because some of this information is graphic, so if you're sensitive to that, just beware while watching this. JonBenét Ramsey was born on August 6th, 1990 to her parents JonBenét Ramsey and to Patricia Ann Ramsey, and Patricia goes by Patsy. So JonBenét got her name from her father. They kind of put a French twist on JonBenét and thus JonBenét. So along with JonBenét, they also had a son named Burke, and he was born on January 27th in 1987, so he was a little bit older than JonBenét. The family is originally from Georgia, and in the early 1990s they moved to Boulder, Colorado for JonBenét's job. So JonBenét worked for a company called Access Graphics, which is like a computer firm, which, started booming in the early 90s because, technology was becoming a thing. The Ramseys moved into a very large home in Boulder, Colorado. I guess you could call it a mansion. And Patsy Ramsey was very much into decorating. They always had decorations for each holiday and even had some magazines come in to take photos of their home. They really enjoyed, decorating and creating the picture of a perfect family. When she was younger, Patsy Ramsey was involved in a lot of beauty pageants and, throughout the pageant circuit. So as JonBenét was growing up, when she was very young, she was put into pageants. And, these are young kids and they put makeup on them and make them look a lot older than they are. And no offense to anyone who puts their kids in pageants, that's totally fine. It's just kind of pertinent to the case because some people think that could have been what caused this crime. To fast forward a little bit, it's Christmas Day, 1996. The Ramsey family went to a family friend's house for dinner, and the parents said that, after dinner, JonBenét fell asleep in the car, and that they just brought her right to bed, because, when kids are little and they fall asleep in the car, you could just pick them up and bring them to their bed, and typically they stay asleep. So that's what they say happened. In the early morning hours of December 26th, 1996, Patsy Ramsey woke up at about 5:30 a.m. The timeline's a little bit unclear on that. And she walked down their spiral staircase, and towards the bottom of the staircase found 3 letters or 3 pages of paper sprawled out. And so obviously she was confused and read them, and it was a ransom note for her daughter. So she obviously was frantic and began searching around for her daughter and called the police right away, even though the ransom note said not to. And here's that call.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was this? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey, I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. Okay, I'm sending an officer over, okay? Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please. Okay, girl. Is somebody? I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, Okay. hurry. Patsy.
So right after Patsy got off the phone with the police, she immediately began calling friends and family to come over and help in the search for JonBenét, which, if you know anything about crime scenes, that's not the best thing to do because you can, possibly trample forensic evidence, and that's just not a good plan. But either way, she called and family and friends rushed over to help begin the search for JonBenét. Before we talk about what happens when the police arrive, I want to quickly throw it in reverse and talk about this ransom note a little bit. So the note that Patsy found on the staircase was 2.5 pages in length, and it was actually written on the stationery from their home. I guess in the 90s when voicemail was a thing, a lot of people left a notepad next to their phone so that they could, scroll down notes or whatever. And so it was on that stationery, which was very odd. And the ransom note asked for $118,000, which just so happened to be the exact same amount that JonBenét got as a Christmas bonus that year. So that led investigators to believe that it was someone within the family or someone who knew them very well that would know that information. The police arrived at 5:55 a.m. and immediately, started searching around looking at the crime scene. They found no evidence of forced entry at the scene. There was a broken window in the basement, I believe, but JonBenét said that he had known about that. It had happened months prior and he just didn't think anything of it because they thought that they lived in a safe neighborhood and thought that they didn't have to fix it. So another kind of iffy thing that I just don't agree with the police work was they only taped off JonBenét's room, which again, because Patsy had invited friends and family over, they were walking all over the crime scene, trampling any possible evidence, and it was just all around not great police work. I think they should have taped off the whole house and said, if you're not the family, please leave. As well as only taping off her room, the police also shared any and all evidence that they found with the family right away and neglected to give them formal interviews until weeks later. So fast forward to 1 p.m. on December 26th, the lead detective on the case tells JonBenét to do a top-to-bottom search of the house to look for anything out of place, anything missing, things like that. And the weird thing to me is that although they said to do top to bottom, go from the top floor to the basement, JonBenét immediately goes to the basement, and when he opens the door into the spare room, he finds JonBenét. And of course, he was so shocked that he picked up her body and brought her upstairs, immediately ruining the crime scene and, any possible evidence that could have been there. Well, again, this is very graphic information, just so you know, but JonBenét was found beaten and strangled, and there were signs of sexual assault, and obviously they had to do an autopsy report to see what the cause of death was. Forgive me if I'm looking down for this next part, I just want to make sure that I have it right. During the autopsy, it was discovered that JonBenét Ramsey had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation in addition to a skull fracture. Her mouth had been covered in duct tape and her wrists and neck were wrapped with a white cord. Her torso had been covered with a white blanket, and there was no conclusive evidence of rape as no semen was found on her, but her areas seemed to be wiped clean, although a sexual assault had occurred. A makeshift garrote was made using the length of cord and a paintbrush from the basement, and the coroner also found what was believed to be undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach. Just to talk about a few odd things that happened with this, autopsy, or that was brought out. So the paintbrush that was used to make the garrote, and if you don't know what a garrote is, please look it up, it's very graphic, I really don't want to explain it. But the paintbrush that was used to make it came from Patsy's art collection, which is very odd. It seems like whoever did this had pretty good knowledge of the house. And the other weird thing, it's all awful obviously, but the undigested pineapple in her stomach, it's odd because, the parents said that she came home, or was asleep in the car on the way home and went right to bed, but she obviously had pineapple because otherwise it wouldn't show up. And there was a bowl of pineapple with milk, because I guess that was her favorite dessert, on the counter in the kitchen, but it only had Burke's and Patsy's fingerprints on it. JonBenét's body wasn't removed from the home until about 10:45 p.m. on December 26th, and because there was no evidence to support whether or not an intruder had done this, the family was able to give the police, blood samples, handwriting samples, all that kind of thing, so that they could compare to what they found at the crime scene. Moving forward, on December 29th, the family flew back to Georgia, where they had previously lived before moving to Boulder for John's job. JonBenét was laid to rest on December 31st, 1996 in Marietta, Georgia. The odd thing about this, I think, is that her headstone says that she passed away on December 25th, but it's just a little odd to me because they really don't know if it was the 25th or the 26th, so I just felt that was something important to include. On January 1st, 1997, again, the family is still in Georgia, John and Patsy did a 45-minute interview with CNN in which they didn't tell their lawyers or the detectives about, and the detectives were very upset because they still hadn't gotten official interviews from them yet because the family said they were too emotional, but they went on, national television, so that stirred up some controversy.
You believe it's someone outside your home?
There is a killer on the
Absolutely.
loose. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But if I were a resident of Boulder, I will tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone else.
A few days after their interview with CNN, the family returns to Boulder, Colorado, and it isn't until early March that the handwriting samples can be, looked at. And from the handwriting samples, the police were able to eliminate JonBenét as a suspect. However, they couldn't conclusively say whether Patsy did or did not write the ransom note. It isn't until April 30th of 1997 that John and Patsy finally have formal interviews with the police. Moving into 1998, the Ramseys are now refusing to interview with police, and out of the 1,000 and I believe 58 pieces of evidence taken from the home, police still are unable to conclude who committed this crime. In about August of 1998, they began to enhance the 911 call after Kimberly Archuleta, who took the call, believed that she heard voices after Patsy thought she had hung up, which again is weird because she claimed it was just her, and they claimed that Burke was asleep. However, they thought it could have been his voice in the background, so they're unsure which story is true. Many detectives on the case began to quit over this specific case just because it had, plagued the nation, and it was this huge story and they just couldn't figure out who did it, and it was really affecting some of them really personally. Now, in 1999, there was a grand jury assigned to the case, and they officially ruled out Burke, John, and Patsy from being suspects in the crime. In 2003, the DNA evidence that was recovered from JonBenét's undergarments is entered into CODIS, which is the National DNA Database, and to this day there are still no hits. It's just an unidentified male, so they are not sure who committed the crime. On June 24, 2006, Patsy Ramsey passes away from ovarian cancer at age 49 and didn't have any questions answered about her daughter's death before she passed. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in, I believe, 1993, and had been fighting it for quite a long time, and she is buried next to JonBenét in Marietta, Georgia as well. Shortly after the crime, the family kind of tried to stay out of the public eye, especially their son Burke, again, who was only 9 at the time of the crime. And it wasn't until 2016 that Burke sat down with Dr. Phil and did an interview, and this was his first, time openly talking about the case to the public. So here's some clips from that.
Did you go to JonBenét's funeral?
Yeah. Yep.
The body of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was laid to rest in Atlanta today, but the mystery surrounding her strangulation is far from over.
Yeah, I remember the viewing. I remember the casket was small and her eyes were closed. I think one of her eyes was a little bit droopy or something, and I thought that was weird.
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped. After this, I won't see her again. I remember my parents being really upset. I remember my dad leaning down and giving her a kiss.
Did you have anything to say to her when you saw her in her casket?
I just kind of stood there, I guess, in kind of disbelief. I don't remember if I put anything in it.
Was it traumatizing to see her?
That was weird. That was traumatizing a little bit. Had I ever been to a funeral before, period? I'm not sure.
Who was with you when you were standing and viewing her?
Me and my mom and my dad.
How were they behaving?
You could tell my dad loved my sister a lot. And
This interview was definitely odd, however it's really hard to examine body language, so they are unable to officially say, you know, whether his smirk means something or if he's just uncomfortable, but to me it seems a little bit odd, but again, I'm not an expert. A lot of people have become obsessed with JonBenét's case, and quite a few have actually falsely confessed to murdering her, you know, just to get their 15 minutes of fame, which is just god-awful, but the things that are mainly reported are in the tabloids, you know, low-level offenders saying that they did it just to get their time in the spotlight. But again, anyone that has confessed, their DNA sample was taken, and it did not match the one found on JonBenet. There are quite a few theories about who could have done this. One of them being that there was a Santa that had dressed up and, you know, met the family and all this stuff, but it was proven that he couldn't have done it because he had previously had, I believe, open heart surgery just before the crime, so he wouldn't have been at a physical level to do that. One weird thing, just to talk about the crime scene for a moment, a black flashlight was found that the family claimed was not theirs, that they didn't know where it came from, and it is highly believed that that could have been what caused the skull fracture in her head. Before I talk about my personal theory, again, I want to state that this is just a theory and like not any fact by any means, but what I think could be possible was that JonBenet had woken up at night after her parents put her to sleep and went downstairs to find possibly Burke eating some pineapple, and she could have, you know, dipped her fingers in to take out a piece, and that would be why there wasn't any of her DNA on the bowl. And perhaps Burke got mad and, you know, picked up the flashlight and hit her. And some people say a 9-year-old doesn't have the force to be able to do that. However, they have run tests and shown that it is possible with such a heavy object to hurt someone. And it's possible that maybe Patsy freaked out and, you know, decided to stage this, especially since the ransom note was written from her stationery. It would be really odd for an outsider to come in and write a ransom note when the person is already dead and just sit at the counter and write this 2.5-page paper. But I think it is possible that, you know, Patsy thought we have to cover this up, especially since during the autopsy, which I forgot to mention earlier, that she could have survived if it was just the skull fracture because, again, as I stated, she died from strangulation, which came after the skull fracture, so if Burke had hit her, she was still alive before she was strangled, possibly when they were staging the crime, meaning if they had done it, they could have probably saved her. And the other odd thing, which I think I forgot to mention earlier, was that the duct tape that was on her mouth did have fibers from the sweater that Patsy was wearing, which she also wore to the family friend's house for dinner the night before. So she was in the same clothes on the 25th and on the 26th of December. Again, as I stated, these are just theories, but I do encourage you to do some extra research and look into the crime. Again, I don't want to show crime scene photos just because they are very graphic and I don't feel comfortable releasing that to the public. You're more than welcome to look that up on your own time, but I encourage you to look into the information and form your own opinion. But it's been 25 years and the only DNA evidence points to an unknown male, so we may never know what happened. But yeah, look into the case, form your own opinions, and let me know what you think.